Cool.
Hey, what's up?
Yeah, I just have a few questions because I've seen clips, I've seen takes, I've seen tweets, I've seen all this stuff circulate about some of the things that you've said recently. And instead of going through like 16 million links and timestamps to try to piece together what I think you believe, I think it'd just be easier if I just ask you a few simple questions.
Yeah, hit me up.
Instead. All right. Okay, cool. So this is about the all the discourse about the LGBT genocide. Do you believe that there is? Okay, first of all, would you define a genocide when you use it in that context?
I mean, we all know the UN definition. I mean, there's a lot of wiggle room around the edges. I think that you could fairly argue that forcible detransition of trans youth is already something approaching like genocidal intent. In the sense that it's leading to a kind of cultural deletion of the existence of a minority group. But if we're talking more explicit stuff, when I say like LGBT genocide, I mean the more traditional like government encouraging stochastic violence against a population to the point where some kind of correctional effort, big finger quotes with correctional, is made to address the mental illness of said groups and so on and so forth. It's the same shit the Nazis did, you know. First, it's because they're mentally ill. Then it's because their mental illness is like corrupting society. Then it's the Jews that made them mentally ill to corrupt society and blah, blah, blah. You know, that kind of thing.
Okay. When you talk about that, do you believe the state would participate in this LGBT genocide, or do you think it would just be the state kind of looking away?
Well, if the Republicans were successful in dismantling democracy, then sure, I believe they'd participate, yeah.
Okay. All right. So then, I already know what your questions are, what your answer is going to be most likely, but I just want to make sure. Do you believe that there is currently a genocide going on against trans or LGBT people in the United States?
No, I think there's a ramp up though. I think Republicans are ramping up simultaneously to dismantle democracy if they win. If they get all three like branches of power at the federal level, and additionally, they're looking to legitimize their dismantling of democracy by redirecting people's antagonisms towards a minority group, which in this case would be, yeah.
All right. Yeah. So we're not there yet. Do you believe that we're at the precipice of an LGBT genocide?
Well, I mean, it depends on whether or not the Republicans are successful in ending democracy. That's like the breaking point. If they can be stopped from doing that, then I think we're fine. I don't think there would be any LGBT genocide in a meaningful federal broad sense with Democrats in power, or even with like an effective split of power in government. It would be if the Republicans are successful in taking over, which they might in 2024. So if that was the case, then yes, right now I would say they are laying the flagstones.
Do you think it's likely that the Republicans win or are able to do that and are able to do that?
Well, it really comes down to whether or not I think they're going to follow through on all the signs they've given that they are uninterested in democracy. Like, they've made it pretty clear they don't intend on following the rules, so I have no reason to believe they wouldn't at least try to dismantle democracy if they had the power to do so without the, checks and balances coming to get them at every possible, opportunity. In terms of how likely it is, I don't know if it's like a 50-50 split. There's a long way to go before 2024. It could be the Republicans self-implode by then. That would be nice.
Okay, so you're not making any statements about whether or not you think it's likely that it is going to happen, merely that it is it that it is likely that they're going to try, or is it that they are currently trying by your assessment?
I think they're laying the groundwork to do so if they do succeed. And if they don't succeed in 2024 to achieve power sufficient for them to dismantle democracy, I think they'll just try again in 2028. I think something substantive has to happen to the Republican Party in order for them to not be this kind of threat.
Okay, so would it be fair to say then that you believe that the Republican Party today likely has or has the intent to commit a genocide against LGBT people?
I don't know how far out in the future they tend to no, I would say yeah. When you have mainliners like Tucker Carlson who are explicitly doing like white genocide great replacement rhetoric, and like the entire party falls behind like the passage of hundreds of anti-LGBT bills in the space of a couple of months in the lead up to an election. No, yeah, I think so. I don't know how much these people just follow the wave and how much of it is them like thinking in their head like, yeah, we got to get rid of these degenerates, but regardless of their level of, like cognitive involvement, I definitely think it's something that they're ready to do.
Okay. So then, if you believe that the Republicans have intent right now to bring about an LGBT genocide, how can you morally object against people right now taking up arms and going out and killing Republican lawmakers?
Republican lawmakers?
Yes.
Well, it would be a utilitarian thing, wouldn't it? It would be if you could get better political outcomes from them doing so. Which, unfortunately, I don't really think it's possible to know that because I'm not God, but as a general rule, that type of thing doesn't tend to work out. But there are plenty of examples throughout American history of lawmakers who have tried to crack down on civil rights, facing at the very least legitimate threats of violence. And I do feel that threats of violence, are a legitimate component of a democratic process when people in power are trying to use that power to suppress minority groups. But
Okay.
if you're asking me whether I think I can morally justify these things, I mean, I don't know. Do you think so? Because I feel like you can pretty rationally arrive at the conclusions that I have vis-a-vis Republicans' likelihood of dismantling democracy and using queer people as a scapegoat and so on.
And I would love to answer any questions about the way I view this. Yeah, as soon as I just want to make sure that I get that all the questions I have are answered first. So then, given like what you just said, you would then, because you said that, oh, you could your opposition to that would be based on utilitarianism, which as far as I understand, you're a utilitarian, right?
I try.
Okay, so would you say then it would be morally objectionable to kill Republican lawmakers right now, then, given that you're a utilitarian?
I mean, given you're painting a very broad brush right now, the like right now, any lawmaker, any circumstance, any like preceding incident, whatever else, as an aggregate, I disagree strongly with engaging in any behavior like that because generally speaking, this leads to bad outcomes, and it's also really difficult to, guarantee the right targets. Like you can always say in an abstract, oh, I think this should happen or that should happen. But of course, when you enable that logic in general, you have no idea where exactly it will lead. However, like given the purview of this conversation and the limits of what sorts of like politics can be talked about on this platform, I can't help but point out that the last time I had this conversation, like it seems like I was like the other person I was talking to was getting nervous answering questions about whether or not Jews could engage in preemptive violence against Nazi officials because they didn't like the idea of those arguments being applied to the current situation. But I feel like any political structure, any political priorities, which would disallow Jews from like preemptively like assassinating Nazi officials. Like if you argue against that logic, what you're essentially saying is that you're happy to have it happen again. Like you're not like you like nothing's been learned,
Do you feel like any of the questions I'm asking you are being asked in bad faith, and I'm trying to bait you into like violating TOS or anything?
No? Did I imply that?
Okay. No, maybe I misunderstood the implication then. So essentially, what you're saying is that people are, because on the virtue of the platform, they're too afraid to like answer even very obvious questions about, for example, Jewish self-defense against Nazis. Correct?
Look, there are plenty of fascist genocides that you can look at in the past and draw direct parallels to the behavior of the Republican Party today, for which people will look in the past and say, oh, of course people should have killed those officials. Of course people should have done this, that. But then when we talk about the modern day, people get nervous. Now,
Okay,
everything makes more sense with the benefit of hindsight. You never know how things are going to pan out. So, of course, looking back on some unfortunate incident, it's going to be easier to make strong calls like that. But I do feel as though people, like especially when we're talking threats of violence. Well, a anti-LGBT law passed by a Republican legislator isn't a threat of violence. It just is violence. They're just doing the violence right there. And when democratic systems fail, as they will if Republicans take charge again, the law is no longer going to be an acceptable metric for determining what effective, praxis is.
Okay. Okay, so just taking it back a moment from there and back to the other question. So we ran on a thing where I asked you, how could you morally object against LGBT people right now taking up, people right now taking up arms against and killing Republican lawmakers? You said that you could make utilitarian objections to that. I would say then you, as a utilitarian, what would you be able to object to? And you said, well, I mean, any Republican lawmaker ever, kind of like, okay, well, there's some dependence there. So would you say that there is a group of there is a group of of lawmakers to which this utilitarian defense that you would say would make it morally impermissible to kill Republican lawmakers at large would not apply to?
Hypothetically, but you could say that about literally any group of people. I have to ask again, do you disagree with that? Like, do you think that would you, like, as a rule, object to literally any kind of like advocacy for violence against a political figure, no matter what it was they were doing or planned on doing?
Yeah, so you've answered a lot of questions. I'll answer some of yours, to be fair. So at the moment where I'm at, I am undecided, and I haven't looked into specifically whether or not like an LGBT genocide is on his way, or is happening, or what that might look like. So therefore, I'm undecided on the question of, is there genocide happening? Is
No,
it
but
something that
it's
is
the
likely to
preceding
happen?
thing.
Yeah,
What?
I understand. Of course.
So if
Now,
if a,
given
if a
that is happening,
well, no,
I
not even that, not even that.
okay.
So the Republicans are openly anti-democracy. I don't think that's objectionable. I think that's fairly straightforward. I don't think you have to be a crazy lefty to believe that. Now, given that, and given the fact that, like, no matter what the law says, realistically, if you hold the three branches of government and you don't believe in democracy, you can do a lot to undermine these institutions. Is there any
Mhm.
threshold at which you think it would be acceptable to, like, advocate for violence against the government? Something the founding fathers were principal
Yeah.
believers in, by the way. It's
Mhm.
written in the Declaration of Independence. Um, is there any
Yeah.
threshold where you think that'd be acceptable?
Absolutely. There are thresholds where it's absolutely acceptable to engage in violence against governments. 100%, without a doubt.
What
Um,
line would have to be tripped for you to think like, because that could be YouTube TOS, depending on how that was phrased, like how far they would have to go. If it's always something in the future, then it's like, well, what happens when that future arrives? What would they have to do?
yeah, that's true. And to be fair, I would need to think more about where my line for that would be. That's not something that I had I thought about going into this conversation. It wasn't. Yeah, it was mainly just asking a few questions that I had
Okay.
in mind right now.
Well,
So
then to be
I
honest
acknowledge
with
your
you,
point. I absolutely think that there is a line where that would be justified. I can't unfortunately give you an answer right now to where that line would be for me.
I think that's fair. And to be honest with you, that's my position as well. I'm not some crazy revolutionary leader or whatever. I'm like a YouTube
Mhm.
live streamer. I think that it's reasonable to make statements like, I think that we should defend our democracy. I think violence against government officials if they try to destroy our democracy. Like, I think statements like those should be unobjectionable in popular discourse. They're enshrouded in the Declaration of Independence. They are commonly echoed both by lawmakers and civilians. Like, this is something that gets, the tree of liberty thing. This gets talked about all the time, and Republican lawmakers aren't shy about it, fighting to defend our democracy. That was the whole thing they screamed during the whole 2020 election fiasco when they lost. Clearly, it's not like out of purview of common discourse. It's just, what do we mean when we say that? The whole LGBT genocide, for me, that's just the thing I think they'll do to legitimize and redirect if they dismantle democracy. The dismantling democracy thing is the thing I'm concerned about. Republican LGBT fear-mongering is always going to be neutered as long as they live in a democracy.
Okay, I understand. Okay, so then another question I have right now. So you talked about the utilitarian thing before. So if it would be possible, if it were to be possible to get away with killing Republican lawmakers with no consequences, would it then be
Wait, are
justified?
you actually Fed posting at me right now? You're glowing in this convo. Wait, are you being fed these questions?
No, I'm not being fed these questions.
Wait.
This is like the line of questions that I want to ask down. How the fuck did somebody in my chat get my rose wrist thing? No, I'm not trying to bait you into things. I'm just trying to understand exactly where this line is, because I think it's an
Destiny's
interesting
watching
question.
the stream right now. I don't know. If you could describe the exact rooftop vantage point from which you would, I defer to your answer. I don't know. My only answer is that I'm a radical advocate for democracy. My position on political violence is less radical than the one that Destiny advocated for in his conversation with iHypocrite back in 2019, where he said
Okay.
that voting is an act of political violence, which people could fairly utilitarian justify violence against
Okay.
people for their votes. I don't think there's anything controversial about my positions, unless you're trying
Mhm.
to, hand wave over it.
Okay. So here's a question that this is a question I have been fed.
Mhm.
if you're, yeah, I presume you'll be fine with answering it. So if they, assuming people who were to be opposed to this genocide, if they could get away with it with no consequences, should they kill Republican lawmakers consequentially?
Are you asking me, like, just generally Republican lawmakers? What about a Republican lawmaker who is trying to pass a bill to revoke their rights in some sense?
If the lawmakers were trying to, wait, yeah, you can answer that in both cases, if they were or if they weren't.
With no consequence. So we're talking like hypothetical what? Thanos snapping?
No, in the sense that the main reason why you objected towards it previously, you said like utilitarian thing, is because you believe that like that the blowback would be worse, and it would maybe lead to worse outcomes overall.
I wouldn't
But
know.
assuming that there isn't any like blowback in like a democratic process, and there aren't any like broader negative outcomes or implications or whatever from killing these lawmakers that might like set aside or push it to the side that the outcomes that you're trying to get at.
I wouldn't know.
Would you be okay with it then?
I have to defer to the wisdom of a wise man who used to once share my platform. The looting and rioting has to stop. And if that means these redneck motherfuckers are out there gunning down something like that, surely if you can advocate for violence against people for torching unoccupied buildings, the act of fighting to legislate against the existence of entire minority groups is up on the table. But I wouldn't know. You'd have to ask the person who from whom that original quote originated. I can't I do feel like we engage in very, very selective phony outrage to political violence depending on how angry we are at the people who are advocating for it. Politics is violence. By the way, the only reason this has been discussed at all, my original position, by the way, which is that people who are trying to destroy our democracy and enact a genocide are like engaging in political violence against minorities, and that defensive violence against that is warranted. This is a position which is not only legislatively backed, but is commonly accepted in politicians and social media. Like, this is like a broadly accepted thing. It's, again, less radical than stuff that Destiny has said in the past. But he is insistent on feigning outrage at this, like when he called me a stochastic terrorist for my hatred of cops, until somebody pointed out to him on a panel that would make him a stochastic terrorist too, because he's done more than his fair share of that kind of rhetoric. It's like all phony play pretend stuff. I guarantee you that if we took away all the hypotheticals and the specifics here, and if I talk to you like, do you agree that politicians enacting anti-minority legislation is a form of violence? Like you and I would agree on every single premise. I think my positions are being made to seem radical here. I don't think they actually are.
Okay.
But you understand, don't you? Think about it, because I want your answer. When there's a government trying to destroy democracy and attack minority groups, at what line do you think it's acceptable? I'm sure you would have agreed of, Tutsis defending themselves, the Jews defending themselves. Where is that line? If you have a general, because there's no like hard line, of course, but there's a general answer there. You have to be careful. Because if the line is too far down the road, it becomes too late. You're like, oh, you can defend yourself after the camps have been built. And if it's too early down the road, then you interrupt the democratic process, because advocacy for violence has a chilling effect on the free speech of other groups. So that's an incredibly difficult line to thread. I don't pretend to have like successfully threaded it, which is why you'll note all the rhetoric that I've used on stream on this subject, all the explicit rhetoric, has just been saying that LGBT people should arm themselves, because if there is a disruption of democracy, neighborhoods that have large communities of progressive or queer people should be armed to defend themselves against right-wing militias, which is what happened in Portland during the BLM riots. So that's not even, I think police would agree with that, wouldn't they? Like, buy guns to defend your home against lawlessness? That's a tough on crime position right there.
Yeah, so you asked me again there, like, what would my question be? And like I mentioned before, and I understand how this puts you in an odd position, because essentially in this conversation, depending on how it's framed, depending on what the line is, also, to be fair, you're going to have to commit to a position, essentially, of like, okay, at this line, I think that it's okay to give back with violence. And because, like I mentioned before, I don't really have that line. It's like, I don't have a position to be committed to. So therefore, it's kind of like we're arguing with like an uneven deck there. Essentially, you've committed to a position that you now have to defend, and I'm still undecided.
No,
on it.
I
So
don't.
it puts you on the
I've
back
never
foot.
said that I have a hard line. My belief that
yeah,
the
sorry. I mean, like,
legislation of politicians can be
mhm.
construed as an act of political violence is an unobjectionable one, but I don't have a hard line for where like stuff on this should be determined. And you
So,
know that, which is why you've had to do all this like, well, what if there were no consequences, hypothetical invisible Thanos snap stuff? Like we're operating in frictionless spherical cow territory.
yeah. So what I was trying to say before, essentially, is that I understand how this puts you on on like a bit of a backfoot because you fundamentally have a position to defend. You know that you think that they're. But you said you didn't have a hard line, but you do have a line to which you think it would be justified, correct? That you have like thought out, right?
No, no,
Or did I
I don't have a
misunderstand you
line for that at
previously?
all. No, at no point
Oh,
have I ever said when this law gets passed, that's when we go hooping and hollering. Because I don't believe that. Frankly, I don't think that like anti-legislative violence is an effective method of achieving political change in this country due to a wide variety of material circumstances. I do think people
mhm.
should arm themselves to defend themselves. And I do think that like implicit threats, like protesting outside of Supreme Court justices' homes, I think that's an
Mhm.
effective and desirable form of political advocacy.
Okay. All right. So you don't have a hard line to that. Okay. Well, that's fine. But the main thing is it's more me asking questions, not so much me arguing with your position necessarily. On what you said though about defensive thing, and this is another thing that I wanted to ask. If there is like a claim that these people are they're intending to like genocide you or whatever. In that case, is there like wouldn't any like even what's it called preemptive violence
I don't
be
know. I'd have
considered
to ask you.
justified?
I like I have to at this point I have to interpret what you're saying as bad faith because I've answered these questions pretty thoroughly and it seems like you're trying to parse out a specific enough answer such as to violate TOS when nothing that I've said so far is even outside of like Destiny's political
So
prescriptions.
I will answer this question for
So
you.
wait, well, hold on,
Uh,
really quickly, really quickly. If Destiny still
okay.
holds to his belief, which he stated unambiguously that you could morally justify violence against Republican voters if you were a minority member who was threatened by policies they voted in favor of, like,
Hmm.
at what line does he think you could start killing Republicans in the streets? He wasn't even talking about lawmakers. Now, if I were to
Hmm.
have that conversation with him, I'm sure he would back off all of it because he's a coward who backs off his positions when he fears they might agree with mine. But
Okay.
when you're in a position like this, what you're doing right now is you're overlooking the fact that you could even say I have a line here. It suggests to me that you're trying to ascribe a degree of immediate intention that is simply not present. And you
I
come
can
on
answer.
here
I
when
can answer
he's
that question
watching the
for you.
stream. I've answered the question. I want to
No, no, no.
ask
I
you.
understand. I
No, no, no,
understand. I
no, no, no,
understand.
no.
No.
Rose, I want to
Mhm.
ask you.
Okay.
Where's
Yeah, and
your
I
where's
can answer
your
that question.
line? What
Yeah,
do
that's the
you
question I
think?
was going to
What
ask.
behavior do
Answer.
you
Sorry.
think would be justifying for political violence? Because I
Yeah.
see he's fear mongering over. I'm sorry. I just looked at my subreddit and he's got his video, the Destiny video, genocide is in blah blah blah, where the thumbnail says they're all evil, shoot them through the windows. What I was referring to was if democracy was destroyed and right-wing militias came in armed trucks to try to occupy a town and like were killing people in the streets, that it would be better to be able to shoot them through the windows than just let you get killed by them. This is less radical than his fucking shooting down or like gunning down arsonists and rioters or whatever. But he pretends to
Mhm.
get angry over it because he hates me. Um,
Okay, I'm gonna answer that question of yours, and I'm also gonna say a few things about Destiny. So, me coming like you can witness live the process for me coming to talk about this. I was going to make a video first, a segment where I talk about your takes on this, and then I realized that fuck, I'm gonna have to go through like 63 million clips to do this. It's better if I probably just ask, and then someone's like, oh, by the way, Vaush stream, you could probably do this now, and and then I messaged you and you responded, and now we're having this conversation. So this isn't like a fucking premeditated attack or whatever. When it comes to Destiny, nothing like he was not involved in this. I got one question from him that he wanted me to ask, and I just asked that question. But that's the full extent of his involvement. You mentioned before how
He popped in the
I'm
stream
not here
3 minutes
to
after you.
defend.
No, it's Rose.
So, but
It's
no,
no
can I
Rose.
finish my
It's
thing, please?
fine. It's just you've
Can I?
asked me 6 versions of can you Fed post for
Yeah,
me?
and
Like
I can answer that question. I
lean
can
into
answer the
the
questions that I've asked you.
lean into the microphone that I have taped in my chest. Can you describe to me what plans you've made to assassinate like political officials?
Yeah,
Like I feel as though I've
I
answered
understand.
the basic premises like the underlying logic, and nothing that I've said is controversial in public discourse or less radical than stuff Destiny has said.
Yeah, and I'm
So
going to
if the
demonstrate that by
interrogation
answering
is
those
done,
questions for you.
what?
Yeah, and I'm going to answer the question that I just asked you that started this thing, just to demonstrate that I'm
I just
willing
want to
to
know
answer
where
this
your
myself
lines
as well.
are.
Yeah, and I'm about to answer that as well, but I just want to wrap up the point about Destiny first. So that's the extent to Destiny's involvement in this. I'm not particularly interested in litigating this between like Destiny and you, or like defending Destiny in a conversation about you. You said that if you were to confront Destiny on this, he would move off it in like a cowardly manner. I think, if I'm not mistaken, that he would probably most likely be willing to have a debate or discussion with you
I
about
have
this,
no
if you'd be
doubt,
willing to.
Rose. Wait, that's the answer you've been stammering your way towards for 30 seconds, that he wants to talk to me? I get
No.
bricks
Hold on.
thrown through
That
my
point of
window
that
every
wasn't.
morning from him,
I
letting him know that
understand.
he wants to make out with it. Like, I
I
get it. I
understand,
know he
but
wants
if
to
we're
talk
having
to me.
but if we're having a conversation and I read out one question that he's asked, and then we get the whole thing about his elongated history, about the way that he would react if you were to talk to him about this, and the way that he would go about it, I just felt like it warranted mentioning in this instance.
I am aware of the fact that he enjoys talking with me, and I'm sure that he would constrict his position or previous positions to whatever would be necessary to spend the longest length of time talking to me possible. Hence these desperate bids for attention. But the
so hold on, this wasn't his bid for attention.
No, I meant like him offering to bet 25,000 on whether or not there will be a genocide or some deranged shit to get my attention. Like, I don't, he has my Discord DMs. He can fucking message me if he wants to talk. I won't, but like, he can. There are less weird ways to get my attention. But with you specifically, because you're curious.
I'm about to answer this question.
Right. Okay. So I want to know, for you.
So,
right. Where would you generally, like, you're in Germany in the 1930s, okay? And there's some Jews there that are getting real antsy, you know, they're not being allowed to leave, their businesses are getting discriminated. When do you think it's okay? Where's your line?
Okay, so the question that I asked you previously was that if you believe that there are people right now with intent to genocide you, and like how would you be able to mount a what's it called, an objection, a moral objection towards them doing that thing, towards violence against those people? And this is what I will say. I think that if there are people in positions of power who have the intent to genocide you, and you believe that they will genocide you, it is justified in engaging in violence against them. I'm answering that question.
Okay. What about
an intent? That's morally justifiable.
What about an intent to dismantle democracy? Because that would be the preceding force behind any genocide in a liberal democracy. You would have to undermine the democracy before you could do that.
I'm not sure if an intent to undermine democracy gets you all the way to intent to genocide. So when it comes to intent to undermine democracy, I would evaluate that based on like how likely they are to be able to succeed in that.
But with democracy itself, like say there was no threat of genocide, but of democracy being dismantled.
So if there is you're saying if there is like a real threat to democracy being dismantled, not just there are people in power with that intent. Because one of the things I very specifically put on the previous question I asked was that there were people in real positions of power with intent to genocide. Real positions of power there kind of implies that they actually have the capabilities towards doing so.
Well, if the Republicans win the presidency and they hold the House and the Senate and the courts, I would say that's a real position of power. That would be the most power any group of humans could hold, really, anywhere on Earth.
That is true, and that's why I mentioned before that I would need to brush up on the checks and balances that would be involved within the U.S. process, and what
would be the
rolling
checks and
back
balances.
Democracy would mean, and like what process would need to be like included within that, and how likely anything like that is to actually happen.
Okay,
and
so
this is the, and to be fair, and this is the reason why I didn't want to get super deep into this, because I put you on the back foot now. Essentially, you need to answer and stand for all these things, and I'm undecided. So I just want to talk with you, which is why I've just been asking questions.
The threat to our democracy is a serious one. If they control all three branches of federal government, there wouldn't be meaningful checks and balances. A lot of the government's functionality relies on gentlemen's agreements that they've broken for years now. They clearly don't care about them. If Congress wanted to put forward legislation to radically alter voting rules or guidelines, or redistricting rules, anything they can do on a federal level, the courts will sign off on it. Anything like legislatively that they want to put through, they could. The president could put forward any executive orders. They could just break the law if they wanted. Remember Andrew Jackson with the whole trail of cheers? The Supreme Court tried to stop
Andrew
him.
Jackson's the president, right?
Yeah, and the Supreme
Okay.
Court tried to stop him. He just said no. The Supreme Court would be on their side. Now, none of this is guaranteed 100% or anything like that, but at the very least, I would say that the second largest political party in the country, which is already favored by undemocratic institutions like the Senate and the Electoral College, pretty much openly indicating they're contemptuous towards democracy with repeated attacks on the legitimacy of existing institutions and half-handed comments towards, Trump third term, Trump's the real president, open QAnon support from the legislators. Like, you look at all that and like, damn, I don't know if democracy would survive. I don't know if we'd get a 2028 election if they won in 2024. Is it guaranteed? No, but at the very least, people can be arrested for threatening to commit murder. They're threatening to dismantle the most powerful liberal democracy on the planet. That's worth taking seriously.
And I agree that it's absolutely worth taking seriously. The Republicans are, they do a lot of, like, especially, the whole, I wouldn't call it a coup, but the January 6th riots, especially, and the rhetoric and all the conspiracies that led up to that is absolutely,
they back Jan 6
general
too.
misinformation. It's like crazy shit. Yeah, I know. I think, I don't know how many Republican lawmakers have, because I remember, if I remember correctly, at the beginning, a lot of them were in with Trump on that, and then like right after, in the aftermath, a lot more were trying to like distance themselves from that.
Well, everyone distances themselves from their failures, right? If it had succeeded, they all would have been on it. I think.
Yeah, and I don't doubt it.
Only a few were like morally, openly against it. Was
Romney against it? He's usually like
Romney.
Okay
Yeah.
Things, yeah.
Romney, Cheney. Yeah, just a couple of them. The older ones.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, apart from that, and that's the threat to me. They can get away with anything after the democracy is dismantled. After you dismantle a democracy, it's not like genocide is some far cry away. It's not like genocides don't happen. I mean, generally speaking, when a authoritarian party takes power, they consolidate their power by redirecting the antagonism of the people in that state against something external and internal. The Nazis did it against international Jewry and everything they could tie to it, which was everything. Here, I mean, whether you want to take it, Mexicans, illegal immigrants, China, Muslims, but for an internal group right now, what they're gunning for clearly is LGBT people. And the rhetoric in just the past 4 years has changed so much. 4 years ago, the rhetoric against trans people was like this fake compassionate scientism, like this, oh, those poor transes don't even know that they're wrong about being the gender they think they are. Oh, they're delusional, but we like, not we support them, but like, okay, well, God bless them. And now it's this crazy, like, they're grooming our kids shit, which was also something they threw against the Jews, by the way, the idea of some sort of, morally degenerate cabal and control of education, introducing sexual degeneracy to their children. Like, it all ties together. Not in a conspiratorial way. It's just something authoritarian governments tend to keep coming back to. An atmosphere of paranoia is the rational response to behavior like this from the Republicans.
Okay, I understand. So yeah, when I answered that question before then about, people in power with genocidal intent, and I answered whether or not violence against them would be justified. Would you agree with my prescription there, or do you think I'm incorrect or I'm irrational when I said that?
If violence against legislators can preserve a democracy and end genocide or prevent genocide, then I think that's justifiable. The specifics as to how that could be done will require foresight and thus are unknowable to us now, but it's a general principle that I hold.
Okay. All right. Okay. I'm not sure because I understand the TOS limitations.
Well, no, I'm not trying to be slippery. Do you that answer that I just gave, like, do you think this is disingenuous?
No, I understand why you're doing it. Okay, I'm gonna lay something out, and then if I'm wrong, you can feel free to correct me if there's something I've misunderstood. Then you can feel free to correct me. Otherwise, you don't have to speak to it. That's perfectly fine. But so at the beginning of this conversation, I talked to you about what your definition for genocide is. I asked about whether or not one was currently going on, whether or not we think there was we were at the precipice of one, or there was a real chance for one. And you seem to answer in the affirmative when it comes to the real chance and being at the precipice and stuff like that for this types of thing, especially if the midterms and stuff like this seems to be going like it's going. Now, given that belief, that you believe that there's a real chance of people in positions of power doing these things, then the prescription then that I gave before and that you agreed to would entail the justification for that type of violence right now today. I think that all follows from what we've talked about in this conversation. But
no.
Given TOS, I would understand why you may not want to.
You keep implying that I'm hiding something. I've said this multiple times.
No, I'm not. Okay.
The precursors for understanding how effective that would be as a solution require foresight or much more explicit lines to be drawn. It's not something that I could responsibly advocate for right now, which is why I don't. The rhetoric that I get in hot water for has to do with self-defense if democracy breaks down, not targeting legislators. At the moment, speaking perfectly honestly, at the moment, anyone advocating for or attempting to engage in violence against legislators is charitably Fed posting and uncharitably is a fucking retard. The idea that any kind of meaningful action can be taken, this isn't some Hitler situation where everything's going to fall apart like a stack of cards if you take out one peg or whatever. The Republican Party is everything in America. We don't live in some sort of Latin American junta or however you pronounce that word. This isn't some situation where some gang of guerrilla rebels can sneak their way into a building and single-handedly change the entire junta, thank you, change the entire the whole arc of American political history. The best thing that we can do right now is to hunker down, to do everything we can to prevent Republicans from winning electorally. And if they do win, we have to fight as effectively as we can on the legislative level against any efforts they make to destabilize democracy. And if they succeed in destabilizing democracy, then yes, I do want queer people or left-leaning people or even liberals to be armed to the teeth in their houses, because if democracy falls apart, the next step is going to be conflict between the federal and blue state governments. And if that takes place, who knows where things are going to fall? What about the state guard? What about the National Guard? What about police? There's going to be a massive range of conflicted interests between different groups, and I want people who are not fascists to be, well armed under those circumstances. Okay. But those are my prescriptions. None of that, I think, is TOS bait or anything to the sort. My abstract positions about if you can do violence to prevent a genocide, then do it, only account for the knowledge of foresight, which, again, I don't have. I can't make that prescription.
I understand. Okay, so here's another thing that I was curious about, because and this is probably me making more of an argument than I have made thus. So if the rhetoric were to be, hey, we're seeing some, and maybe I've misunderstood. Maybe this is exactly what your rhetoric has been. If it's hey, we're seeing some threats to our democracy that could lead to violence down the roads. Just make sure that you're protected in case that should come to pass, and that you could be able to mount some self-defense if that were to happen down the road. Do you understand? So those set of prescriptions, given that identified problem. Now, if you identify a new problem, you're hey, by the way, there is a real risk for an imminent genocide of you and your people coming up right now. But only the kind of the defensive action is warranted in this instance. That prescription doesn't follow that well from the identification of the problem as compared to in the former case, because the issue is that it's essentially you saying hey, by the way, there's a genocide that is about to happen, or that is going to happen, or that might happen in the near future. There's a significant chance for it, but all that you should do about it is just be ready when it comes. Which doesn't feel like we would both say that hey, if we had some maybe Nick Fuentes or whatever talking about the Great Replacement, if he were to talk about how, hey, people in power, they're genociding you, white people, they want you to die, and then when somebody else like, hey, oh, like what would your prescription be to that? They would
You're
probably just be
accusing
like,
me of
okay,
dog
well,
whistling now.
I'm not accusing you of dog whistling.
Rose. If democracy gets so this is, I guess this would be the difference between myself and a LARPer like Nick Fuentes, whose I don't know, whose audience is driven primarily by the aesthetic of feeling like they're on the precipice of rebuilding like a what. Actually, no, his audience is about gay denialism. I take it back. It's all fucking boy moding over there. No.
You should have seen him when I put on the cat ears and the debate I had with him. Holy fuck,
Yeah, I heard about that. It was a good meme.
Yeah, true.
Wait, people in chat are complaining about my mic.
Exponentially more polite to me after that. But
what is the issue with my mic, chat?
Yeah, I hear some vague, like some very quiet voice coming from your microphone.
Very quiet.
It sounds like a news broadcast almost.
An echo? Wait, do I have something playing on the desktop? There's a weird buzz when you talk.
I can hear it, which means it's not your desktop output as well, unless your microphone is picking up some output.
Wait, that's
on your end.
Wait, let me just make... Okay, wait, I'm just going to hang up for a second to make sure that it's not somehow you, because that's never happened to me before. 1 second.
I don't hear it anymore.
Okay, it's gone? Okay, that's really weird. I've never heard of that audio issue before. Okay, hello?
Hello.
Okay. Sorry, I've never had that audio issue before. Oh, shit. Fucking Destiny's in the call. Oh, God. Fucking sneaking. All right, the question, am I dog whistling? No. The critical difference here being that there's like a threshold. If Republicans succeed in dismantling democracy, I think all bets are off. I mean, if you want me to be explicit about it, then yes. Like if McConnell like goes Mecha Hitler and like puts his brain in a jar and mounts it on a robotic spider and goes like door to door and starts like firing lasers through the windows of people who have like the gay flag hanging outside their house, then like sure, fine, you can shoot. Like past a point, you know. If democracy gets dismantled, and by that, you know, there's no like clear hit the button to dismantle democracy type thing, but you know, if democracy is meaningfully dismantled, if there is this like big crackdown, then yeah, I think all bets are off. But at that point, my positions are as radical as like Top Gun. You know, like my positions are as radical as like if the bad guys try to when bad dudes try to take over the White House, what will you do? Like, sure, you know. I subscribe to Duke Nukem politics. You know, if the bad dudes, if the bad dudes destroy democracy, then sure, fucking go hog wild. But we're not at that point right now. When we arrive at that point, I doubt there will be a YouTube TOS that you can get me kicked from. But you know, I don't want it to arrive at that point, which is why my prescriptions right now are towards defensive violence. You know, like hunker down, buy guns, buy ammunition. If something happens, then that's bad. And if something doesn't happen, then that's good. I would prefer that. You know,
do you believe that?
Oh, yeah.
So when I say, I can't think of a better word to describe, and this word has negative connotations, because usually when people say fear mongering, they refer to fear mongering about something that is not a real threat. When I say fear mongering now, I'm not making any implications towards the accurateness or the veracity of the threat that we're talking about. So I'm going to ask you then: do you feel like when you are fear mongering about the prospect, or even like a likely prospect of an LGBT genocide, do you feel like that undermines your prescription that violence should only be defensive?
No, not even remotely. In fact, I think you suggesting that is borderline offensive, because it implies that you would have to be willfully ignorant of any potential for attacks against minority groups in America in order to not flag this like anti-liberal, like potential stochastic violence flag, you know. Acknowledging great evil within a country will always carry with it the potential for inciting violence in an audience, but I would rather be honest about what's happening and take that risk than I would like lie about it. Like at that point, like the real question is like, should we lie and pretend everything's okay, because then maybe nobody will act on anything, you know? Like, I mean, like,
so essentially
maybe,
what you're saying is that yeah, you understand. You don't necessarily disagree with what I'm saying, but you're just simply saying, yeah, but the alternative is worse. Like, well, not accurately reflecting the situation, the prospects for an LGBT genocide then
If
in
you're
your eyes is
referring
worse,
if
correct?
you're referring to stochastic violence, this is something which is potentially a threat whenever anyone talks about anything bad going on. Whether you're talking about drugs on the streets, immigrants coming in from the southern border, from a conservative end, like different racial groups or different religious groups, if you're talking about how cops do this or wealthy people do that, any complaint about society is going to carry with it the possibility that people will hear that and do the Joker smile and go reach for their, for their armory or whatever. I don't think there's any way to get around that. I think you contribute to that. I think Destiny contributes to that. I think literally everyone does to some extent or another. It's not avoidable for anyone. The only thing we can do is try to be honest when we talk about the issues we're referring to. So when people talk about the problems with like drug users or criminals or immigrants, I think they lie all the time. I don't think that I'm lying. I think that a fairly straightforward assessment of the behavior of the Republican Party today can lead one to the assumption that, yeah, they do want to undermine democracy, and yeah, they do want to sort of ferment tremendous social antagonism towards queer people.
I I think that part of that was I'm not sure if that was if I got any feedback on whether or not my statement of your positions was accurate. So I want to revisit that in a little bit. But before that, I think that there was a little bit of muddying the waters in that instance when you talked about, well, everything contributes to or has the chance to contribute to stochastic violence.
That's
Probably
absolutely the
everything
case,
does
though.
to, yeah, but to like vastly, like incredibly different degrees. So, for example, if you have like a conservative person's like, hey, we should probably limit immigration because of the effects it has on native workers' wages or whatever. Okay, regardless of the truth of that claim, that's one statement you can make. That's one political prescription you can make. Now, if you also make the statement of we need to stop immigration because these people are invading our countries, they're destroying our values, devaluing our institutions, and eroding the racial makeup that made this country so great for every second that passes, those two statements are going to lead to vastly different risks
The
of
problem there,
that leading into stochastic violence.
the
Wait, do you
problem
agree or do you
there
disagree with that?
Of course, but the problem there is one of
Okay.
honesty. If the second statement was true, if the country literally was getting invaded and was going to be destroyed, which is of course not the case with any immigrant group, but if that hyperbolic language was true, then yeah, whatever products, like that language might lead to people getting angrier, but it's also an honest assessment of the situation. We have to be honest. For example, people have been, including
Yeah.
liberals, by the way, not just us crazy
Mhm.
lefties, have been talking about how the attack on Roe versus Wade is this huge, huge, huge deal. That's already led to a Molotov bombing of an office. That's going to lead to a lot of stochastic violence. Should I not say, like, yeah, Republicans are revoking Roe v. Wade on a federal level because, they don't believe in women's reproductive and health
Mhm.
rights? Because that might instill in my audience, a violent tendency. As long as you're being honest, then, you know, I feel it's your responsibility to address the situation at hand. Most stochastic
Yeah.
violence comes about from dishonest political propagandizing. But the
Mhm.
problem there, at the end of the day, from the end of the person producing that info, is the dishonesty, because otherwise, what can they do?
Okay, so this brings me back to the other thing that I wanted to circle back to. So so obviously we both agree that different types of rhetoric is going to lead to different likelihoods of stochastic violence occurring. I didn't think you'd disagree with that, but I just want to make that clear. So then, am I correct in understanding that essentially what you're saying there is when it comes to the questions I asked you before about whether or not you talking about your fear mongering about the an LGBT genocide is undermining your prescription for defensive violence. So I'm correct in saying then that you understand the effect it has on your prescriptions and what prescriptions that might intuitively lean people towards, but you still take distance away from those. But you think that doing that, even though the effect that that's going to have on your prescriptions is better than the alternative, which is in your case, and like lying or misrepresenting or underplaying the severity of the harm or the issue we're talking about, which in this case is the LGBT genocide. Is
Yeah,
that
I
correct?
don't think we should lie about a political party potentially gearing up to undermine our democracy and commit a genocide, because telling the truth about that might lead people to engage in irresponsible, violent behavior. Because the
Okay,
logical
perfect.
extension
Yeah.
of that is that we should always sugarcoat all bad information and never tell the truth about anything political, because it might encourage people to engage in bad behavior.
Yeah, excellent, and I agree with what you said. And then the only like extra conversation to be had at this point, which is one that I'm not prepared to have at the moment, would be examining the veracity of the claims to the risks of the disillusionment of the is that the right dissolving of the U.S. democracy and of the chance for an oncoming LGBT genocide, which both of those things I'm not prepared to analyze in this conversation, and I'm still undecided on both of these, as I haven't done enough reading into them yet.
I get that. With respect, though, doesn't it seem a little bit odd to be curious about my positions on this when you don't have your own? Because it seems like you have an implied counterposition to me that you're just not expressing.
Mm-hmm.
Because in order to do so, you would have to draw a line in the sand on which other genocides you would prevent potential victims from engaging in violence to defend themselves for. But you don't want to commit to that counterposition. You just want to get TOS bait out of me.
Yeah, and that's what I think I tried to say this 2 or 3 times earlier in the conversation, which is why I've been focusing this mostly towards asking questions more than a debate, because I recognize that the position of the upper hand position that this places me in by virtue of me being undecided on the
Destiny
claims of those.
puts out a video on me 3 hours ago on this subject. You come into my chat. For the first time, you say, hey, can we talk? Check DMs. Mm-hmm. And in DMs, you want to talk now. Destiny's watching the stream as you talk to me. You admit you've been given a question by him to ask me. Most of the questions you ask me are TOS phishing fed bait, where you're essentially trying to bait me into commit specifically into violating YouTube TOS. And then when I ask you what your positions are on the subject, and whether you can be consistent in this, morally consistent, and say oh, well, I don't think the Jews should have fought back against this, that, or the other either, whatever prescriptions you would arrive at, you're like, oh, well, I don't have those answers.
I did answer those questions, though.
Well, your answers were you don't fully know, so you aren't able to commit to anything that could implicate you.
I answered that given a descriptive reality, these are the prescriptions that I think would follow. I answered those, and I even said at the very beginning, I think that I'm undecided about the descriptive reality of the questions.
I'm not dumb.
So let me address the other things that you mentioned there. So I don't know what the so I'm gonna ask you 2 questions again. So before I asked you if you think I'm asking these questions in bad faith, you said no. Have you changed your mind on that?
I don't know what you consider bad faith to be. To be honest, I don't trust liberals. I don't really know. You might think that this is some good faith effort to expose stochastic terrorism or some shit on my part for beliefs that would have been considered moderate by the founding fathers. I genuinely don't know. The only thing I know is how your behavior comes off to me. And this is also, I can't help but note, not the first time that I've had this convo with a liberal. And every time this happens, they're when I ask them well, what line would you draw for historically preceding instances of violence and authoritarianism? They don't really have they can't draw a comparative answer. So it just seems often there's this intuitive repulsion to the idea of applying lessons learned in the past to the modern day.
So what's the equivalent of today's situation, a question I haven't been able to answer when it comes to the drawing a parallel to
you can look up the stages of genocide. What are we on, stage 5 or something? It's it's a whole list that you can look at. Well, you can take a look at the timeline with the Jews in Nazi Germany and the rhetoric that they engaged in. I think a lot of it is pretty similar to the rhetoric that we're seeing today. We also know the Republicans are anti-democratic. Even if the Republicans fail in destroying democracy, that doesn't make them less anti-democratic. It just means they're going to be a problem down the line. Something has to be done about that. I'm not shy about saying I think Republican Party officials should all be arrested for sedition. If we want to settle this in some law-abiding liberal sense, then I suggest you advocate for that as well. Because the alternative is having an openly anti-democratic party in a democracy that chips away at our institutions every successive election season, which is not sustainable, and the Democrats aren't willing to do anything about it.
Okay, so to be clear, I don't think that I've been unwilling to answer any question, and which was kind of the thing about the comparison you drew there with the liberals who won't answer the questions about Nazi Germany or whatever.
Okay, what about if here, I'll ask you, if Republican officials passed a law saying that
before you ask that, up until this point, have I been unable to answer any of those questions?
Yeah, you weren't able to describe a particular point in other historical genocides where you feel it would be um, morally justified for the minority group to engage in defensive violence.
Okay, do you think I'm not answering that question because I don't want to answer it, or do you think I'm not answering it because I don't think I have enough knowledge on it?
I don't think you can know the answer. I think that it's a fundamental moral gap in liberal ideology, because a slavish adherence to the aesthetic of anti-violence is core to liberal ideology, when political violence is what the system is built from. Because I've had this convo with plenty of liberals, and I get the same answer every time. So I have to assume that it's like a fundamental, like core issue. It's not an intelligence thing. I just think it's something the ideology can't account for.
Okay, so you're saying that by virtue of my ideology, if I were to like look into the in-depth, the stages that led up to the rise of Nazi Germany and the beginning of the Holocaust, I would be unable to draw a line there anywhere.
With
Is that what you're
respect,
saying?
Rose, I talked with you in DMs about climate change and where you think it would be acceptable to engage in eco-trolling as a potential solution, and you said you wouldn't find it acceptable to attempt that until after such damage had been done as to end the world. I think I can find our DM
I'm not
logs.
sure if that's what I'm gonna go back and check if I
No,
said that.
I think I recall the
I think we'd
convo.
be digging through all the answers to this
Well,
conversation.
no,
but
I don't
that's
want
okay.
to go looking, but I distinctly remember that the
I mean, you
line
bring
for
them up, so
you
now I have
when
to go
going
looking for them,
outside the
right?
law would be acceptable for anything climate change related was
Yeah,
like
but now I have to go looking through these old
past.
DMs, right?
Well,
For
it was
this.
definitely well past where I would
Yeah, but that doesn't mean it's at the point where I don't do anything until fucking the world is on fire, correct?
it might have been around that point.
Okay. Well, hold on. Now I need to read through all these DMs because this was brought up. So this thing, if there's no, I don't think that would be.
Oh, we were talking
okay.
about Jews back then too. That's
I
crazy how
probably
often
wasn't
they...
me that invoked them.
Wait, we were having this exact conversation. What about insurgents before death camps were built then, before the night of broken glass even? Often when the state is actively calling for your death, it's already too late. When it's merely worsening conditions and the looming threat of mass death, is it morally permissible to fight back? Rosewrist, when I was talking about liberals not having answers to this, I was thinking of you. Well, in the past, not just you, but it's happened before.
So what did I... Okay, wait, sorry, can you read out exactly, like, what
this is a very long text convo, but the basic... We had a call, and then I just brought it up offhandedly, But yeah, I just hold on.
So okay, here's what I let me see if I can find. I would say with this type of thing, if there are no institutional alternative solutions, then yes, eco-trolling would be fine.
But you were never able to answer when that would be, like when there would no longer be institutional solutions. And this will be a problem with the breakdown of democracy too, because when the democracy starts getting broken down, your solution is going to be, well, look towards institutional solutions. When Republicans start doing crazy shit on the federal level, you'll be like, okay, well, this like legislative stuff should happen. We should do this or should do that. But all these possibility spaces get blanked out over time. And then eventually the looming specter of eco-trolling looms high, but eventually, like past a point, it's too late. That was the convo that we had.
I mean, I'd probably say when democracy.
Yeah, right here. You said my breaking point for allowing non-legal responses to climate change would be when climate change brings about the fall of democratic society, which in America and Western Europe would be a point after hundreds of millions of people have died in the developing world.
Yeah, that was a weird way. So what I said right before I started reading that, I would probably say that breaking point would be when our democracy is no longer functioning. It doesn't have to be like it's incapable of like resolving this issue.
But when that's like how I feel right now.
It's so broken. Yeah.
But it's
and now that takes us into the conversation about the descriptive facts, which we not descriptive facts, the descriptive reality, which once again I've said that on this current issue I haven't made a decision on yet.
Right. I guess the only reason I bring this up is because I feel like this is just a difference with liberal ideology. It's a belief in the resilience of institutions and their ability to fix problems. But the Weimar Republic was a very democratic and very progressive society before the Nazis took over. And I just don't have as much faith in these institutions as you do. And I am very worried about this country and its future.
So yeah, so once again, I'll say when democracy ceases to, when democracy, when you no longer have like a democratic process, I would probably say that that's most likely where the line would be.
Well,
when it cannot be addressed through democracy. So I've answered your question now about the line. I'm the first liberal to answer that question.
Okay, well, thank you. I appreciate that. All right,
You're
well
welcome.
then.
Okay, so
most of
my I want to get to some of the other stuff as well that you said.
Sure.
So
most of my comments are kind of like predicated on that, right? The idea of democracy being undermined by a Republican victory when they start dismantling our institutions.
Yeah, so, but now we get into the descriptive things again. So before you said a thing about how yeah, you said, oh, Destiny uploads a video 3 hours ago. In chat, you know, you've been fed one question, but you keep implying that I've like been sent here as like a minion of Destiny.
No, I don't think you've been sent here as a minion of Destiny. I know you operate autonomously. I just know
I have been streaming for more than 3 hours. I could not have watched that video. I mean, unless I watch it live, but I don't watch his live streams.
I'm not debating over the timeline. You have to.
But you keep bringing it up. You keep bringing it up as if like I'm like. Like, do you realize, like, when somebody says, like, oh, you know, you're here after this other person made a video on this exact topic, and they've been talking about a lot about it, and you even admit that you got one question from him, and like, I know he's watching it right now.
Was anything that I said there incorrect?
No, it's not. Wait,
okay, then those facts are sufficient for me to have warranted chaining them together and making presumptions.
But the implication there, you realize that even though those things are all factually accurate, the way that they've been selected leads to an implication, right?
Well, the implication is a byproduct of the fact that those statements are true. So it won't, like, that remains the case. So what is that
implication then?
Well, the implication to me is that well, it wouldn't be anything as significant as like you were sent here by Destiny or anything. Only probably, actually, no, the best guess is that his community is in your community. He does this to a lot of people's communities. It took ages for me to break mine free of his. Where DGG is a huge part of adjacent streamers' communities. So whenever anything happens on his end, you get made aware of it too. As soon as you do something, people in your chat go to his chat and his chat to your chat. So it's not so much that you're operating on his behalf, it's that there's a synchronicity as a product of the collaborations that he does that lead to his chat being present all over the place.
So I'm gonna I can address some of those assumptions then. So none of me doing this had any influence from chat whatsoever, anything of the sort. So I wanted to actually, firstly, I think like 3 days ago, I was going to go over that debate you had with the other lib guy on stream. And then I watched it. I realized that I was okay. Never mind. I was really tired, and I didn't feel like I could go over it properly because I was just like I was really tired. I hadn't slept great the next few days, and I said I'm gonna think about this a bit more and make another video about it later because there was so much being talked about there, and I realized that hey, for me to be able to accurately review that, I would need to do more research onto the descriptive things that we're kind of like talking about in this conversation as well. So I decided to not do that and not finish that review, not upload it as a video. And then today I was like, okay, today I'm going to talk mostly about what like defensive violence really means and what the implications for that are. I was going to do it on my own. And then somebody brought, oh, by the way, Vaush is streaming. I was like, okay, you know, it might be a good idea to like ask him directly about it because I realized that I would need to go through a lot of clips to be able to do this. And I went and I talked to you. And then once that happened, I got like a message from Destiny, and that's it. That's all. So this is not like it's not my DGG community grooming me towards coming to talk to you or like interrogate you on this.
And I apologize for offending your pride. At the end of the day,
come on, Vaush.
No, well, okay, wait, hold on. First of all, no, there's not. Wait, hold.
It's not offending the pride.
Bros, it is. Wait, it is at least a little bit of a pride thing, and there's nothing wrong with that. I'm prideful
I'm an
as
agent
well.
of Vaush, okay, agent of Destiny. Okay?
It's fine. We're all prideful about stuff. Nobody wants to feel like they're considered to be beholden of another streamer. Anyway.
So do you or do you not think I am still?
It's not a matter of you being beholden. It's nothing online works that way. Nobody's an agent of anybody else. Nobody's well, some people are, but usually
why do you feel the need to bring it up?
Because you don't have to be a direct agent of Destiny for me to note that your behavior here, from my perspective, is a byproduct of his obsession with me. I'm not stupid. The same thing happened after the Mr. Girl discourse. His obsession with me literally dictates discourse in the DGG orbiter or suborbiter sphere for months. His obsession with me is he only started talking with Mr. Girl again after Mr. Girl came on my stream, talked about little girls' panties, and then I booted him off, and Destiny immediately had him back on a second time. What he decides to fixate on is what his chat gets on about, and what his chat gets on about is what dictates discourse in that sphere, and what dictates discourse is what directs the interest of people around him, including you. And I'm not immune to this. This is just how socialization works. But from my perspective, this is just downstream of his obsession with me. Now, that doesn't make you like an agent or whatever, but it is like a component of the broader factor, you know?
Do you understand how like bringing it up in that way kind of like not disparaging isn't the right word, but it's like it's delegitimizing in a way, right? Not necessarily to me as a person, but to the conversation, to the questions that are being asked. It kind of like brings the tone that, oh, like right now we just had like a DGG dialogue tree that was imposed upon us, like right now on stream. There's nothing of value to be gathered from this.
I do feel that way, because I do feel that your input on this is at least partially determined by, I guess at the end of the day, speaking frankly, my positions are so objectively correct that I feel like outside Destiny's obsession and the waves that makes, you'd have to be like really fucking retarded to disagree with them. Everything that I've said, I feel like not only am I right, I'm so self-evidently correct by every possible angle and every possible interpretation that it would take deliberate bad faith to misconstrue me. But often I am astounded at the capacity of the liberal to misunderstand the nature of political violence. So, no, I apologize if I come across... No, Rose,
I answered your question.
It's not about you.
You said you just want to talk
I'm
about
just
the other liberals
frustrated
and Destiny
that
and
this is
everything.
where the
Like,
discourse is at. It's like where we're at right now with the Republicans, hundreds of state bills being passed, and Destiny's out here waving a stack of dollar bills outside my window, trying to get me to text back by offering to bet on whether there will be a genocide of gay people. And I'm like, fuck, Jesus. You know,
Yeah,
maybe irrational chat or chud or whatever is right, and it really is just all like deranged, like drama LARPing for most of the people in this community. Not you. I like you. You're a data male, but I do think that arranged drama LARPing pushes discourse, and I think everyone gets swept up in it. And I don't feel I've said anything dishonest with you.
Yeah, I understand, but okay, So you say that you like me because I'm a data male. Okay,
I like you for other reasons too. I mean, yeah, I'm being facetious when I say that, but yeah.
Yeah, I understand. But so do you understand that even if we're having this conversation, and if I'm like pushing on something, and then immediately, even though you think there's nothing like that, like wrong or bad with me or whatever, you keep kind of like invoking the liberal stereotype, Destiny, GGG. Do you understand how that's going to like reflect in the minds of your audience, who all like have an instinctually, justified or not, negative reaction towards those terms and those concepts and those ideas, and how that's going to reflect on to me and like the topic that we're discussing and all of that? Or do you genuinely think that
I do think that you're a liberal, and I do think that your behavior in this conversation is a product of that obsessive discourse, byproduct. Look, it's not, it's the reasons. If my community is at any point miffed after this, I think it's motivated largely by the questions that you've asked and the framing of those questions. But I mean, we can argue about this.
Do you think I framed any question dishonestly?
Dishonestly isn't what I'm concerned about. I think you framed them leadingly, in a way which has misinterpreted what I've said and tried to maximize the potential negative outcomes for my channel.
Okay, what have I misinterpreted that I haven't given you the opportunity to clarify?
It's not, Rose, I feel like you're being obtuse here. It's not that you're misinterpreting any specific thing that I'm saying. It's that you sound like a federal agent.
All right, well, fuck.
Okay, so wait, do you agree with me? Wait, hold on. Do you agree with me that, actually, I'll ask you directly. If a cop seems intent on killing you, even though you've done nothing wrong, do you think you have a right to shoot that police officer in self-defense?
Yeah, if per somebody's moral system, you have not done anything morally wrong, and therefore you're gonna have
Legally,
violence
yeah,
inflicted on.
like legally, like you're totally in the clear, and they're just gonna
Well,
shoot you. You know?
yeah, I don't care about the legal part. I care about the moral part. Then in this instance, then yeah, if you're gonna be killed unjustifiably, then yes, you have the responsibility to, or no, you have responsibility, but you have a right to engage in self-defense.
Okay, so do you agree then, at least in the United States, that at least somewhat frequently, you know, cops will kill people without any justification? Not like every day or whatever, but like it happens, you know?
But yeah, there have absolutely been instances of completely unjustified police killings. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, I completely agree. Now, if in such a situation, you know, you had an unjust killing and you went on stream and you said, you know, that was an unjust killing. The person who was killed, you know, shouldn't have been killed. And then I call in and I'm like, do you think he had the right to defend himself? And you were like, sure. And then I'm like, so do you think he should have killed that police officer? And you're
Then
like,
I would answer yes.
right. And you could be like, yeah, sure. And I'm like, okay, so morally, do you feel like people have the right to gun down police officers whenever they feel they've done nothing wrong while being apprehended by a police officer? And like, now the thing is, nothing
Well,
that
then
you're
I would
saying...
answer. Do you want to know how I would answer that
Go
question?
ahead.
Because I can answer. Yeah, and that question I'd be like, I don't know how much has to feel. I think that if people have a justifiable moral claim to self-defense, that they're morally justified in exercising that right to self-defense. Yes.
Okay. Well, you realize that depending on the perspective there, that could justify like people firebombing police officers, right?
Yeah, of course, but I'm speaking from my moral system,
well,
not from other people's moral system.
You basically just said it's okay to do it if it's okay to do it. That's not a real answer. Like if the morals justify it, well, yeah, of course. But if you're presupposing that, then...
Well, I answered the question you asked specifically was, would people be justified in engaging in self-defense against cops if they're unjustifiably killing them, right? So I answered your question.
Yeah, so you have the right to gun down police officers under your moral system if the police officers are threatening them but don't have any moral reason to do so.
If the police officers are unjustifiably going to kill you, then yes.
What's unjustifiably?
Then we would have to deep dive into like the specific situation and the moral frameworks and rules we have leading up to that point.
Well, that's what I'm asking you.
Like what are the exact standards and like the
That's what you were asking me, wasn't it? You were asking me that about lawmakers. Like I was answering, this is exactly what I mean. I was answering, well, it depends, you know, like there are a variety of utilitarian circumstances that can like change the outcomes here. And without like hindsight, you have no way of it. And you were like, okay, so like specifically though, if you could like isolate those factors, would you kill these officers? And it's like, well, fuck.
Okay,
you're basically like, this is what I mean.
Isolate the variable and ask me a question.
But there's no, but the point is that outside of the TOS bait, there's no value because you're asking me to isolate for factors that can't be isolated for in real world discourse. What you're essentially asking me is, would you kill someone if killing them made the world better? To which, in a utilitarian sense, the answer would always have to be yes, because the outcome is positive. The question is, how the fuck do you know if killing someone?
It would depend, unless you would have, like, for example, like some form of utilitarian rule that would like intercept them, right? Like, even though in that like one instance that would be fine, it would violate the broader rule that we should remain like keep the sanctity of, right?
Yes,
so not necessarily.
There can be superseding rules to consider that there, but even within a rule utilitarian framework, you can make allowances given specific considerations. And if you're doing
this, it would depend on your moral framework, which is like one of the things that would come out of like that type of questionnaire, right?
Well, my framework, I think, is pretty publicly known, but the issue here is that like the questions that you've been asking, it's like, would you kill Republican lawmakers if it would lead to good outcomes? And it's like, well, from a utilitarian perspective, good outcomes being the thing you're trying to maximize for, the answer to that would be yes for any group of people.
No. So to be fair, I never asked you a question about good outcomes. The question
preventing
that I asked
genocide
that you're getting at. Hold on. The question that I asked that you're getting at is the one about that there wouldn't be any like broader pushback or consequences against that struggle. So the struggle against, in this case, like genocide in that
instance. Said no consequences to prevent genocide. I consider preventing genocide to be a good outcome. I'm trying to simplify the variables here, but you keep interrupting me.
Fine.
The point I'm getting at is that you're correcting for the variables that moderate the discourse. So by getting rid of those variables and isolating only the if X then Y, the only outcome that you can arrive at is, well, yes, I suppose I do think that you can kill people if it prevents a genocide. But that's an answer any sane person would arrive at. Like a mentally well person hopefully would arrive at that answer.
Yeah, that's fine. And then answer that. And then we're all
But
good.
I
And I think you even did.
But then
Yeah.
you're
So then what's the problem?
So why are you asking me questions you could be asking Mima down the street and getting the same answer from? You're clear, and you're asking them in such a
Mima down the street
leading
isn't like
sense.
a political like streamer. I think it's important to clarify exactly like where these trains of logic go and where they stem and moral positions and stuff like that.
Everybody believes the stuff that I've said. Oh, do you think it's okay to kill people prevents genocide? Well, sure, yeah. Like basically everyone's going to say yeah. But the way you phrased it really fucking sounded like TOS bait, man. Because YouTube TOS can be flagged by shit that is both morally and legally justifiable. YouTube TOS is just a broad, like, overlap to try to keep people from harassing each other on the platform and keep the advertisers happy. But the way you were phrasing things seemed like they were maximized to take standard concepts that everyone agrees with, but frame them in a way to make it sound as yikesy as possible. And again, like, I can still answer these, and I did, and I wasn't dishonest in doing so, but I feel like, given the fact that Destiny is screaming about how I'm a stochastic terrorist, and he's watching the stream while you talk to me, and you posed a question given by him, and blah, 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 like, I think it's reasonable to at least be a little bit aware of the possibility that you might be trying to TOS bait me.
The topic is a yikesy topic, right? We're talking about, like, it's not that I'm inflating this out of nowhere or anything. Like the topic we're talking about currently existing living people. We're talking
My positions
about
are
genocides. We're talking about
uncontroversial.
states. Okay, that's fine, but that doesn't. So what I'm currently getting at is your perception of me as like inflating this for literally no reason. Like that what we're talking about is controversial stuff.
It's not controversial.
I understand, to get you baited. It's like it's. I'm not saying that. I'm saying that I'm not inflating it. I haven't taken your statements out of context. They're being used specifically within the intuitive context in which they are stated. Right? It's not like you said something about.
Not really. I don't even talk about anything.
To fucking kill someone in a video game and then me bringing that up to like a real life scene. Like we're specifically talking about violence and stuff in the realm of the current political climate.
But I don't even talk about violence against lawmakers. I talk about self-defense if democracy breaks down. But you can't get a clip out of that, can you? Because if I say, yeah, if democracy breaks down and Patriot Prayer rolls through with a bunch of AR-15s trying to find, like, blacks to kill, then you should be able to shoot them. That's not controversial either. But if you narrow all of the adjacent hypotheticals
who are
down
the people
to, like,
that are like deconstructing the democracy? It's the lawmakers. Yeah.
Well, yeah. So Patriot. So, but that's what I talk about. The owning guns, the self-defense thing. I don't talk about organizing strikes against lawmakers. You're extrapolating my logic. I've explained to you why I don't believe in, like, any kind of crazy fucking political trolling with lawmakers. But you're like insisting on talking about that in severe language.
To flesh that out.
I don't think you illuminated meaning. I think you actually obfuscated it in a way that coincidentally just happened to ask me questions that would have put me at the greatest liability for TOS violations.
Okay,
repeatedly, multiple times in a row, over and over again, no matter how I answered them, even if the questions you ask as follow-ups are basically just repeats of the ones before.
Okay, so in summary then, you felt like in this conversation, there was no new clarity or anything like that gained. It was just an attempt by me to clip chimp you. And get you, like, banned through TOS.
I do feel like you were trying to clip chimp me, yes.
All right.
Because I don't think there's anything wrong with talking about this. I just think that every element of this conversation from your end, at least the first half of it, has been maximized to minimize your, like, potential risk of sympathizing with my positions and maximize the likelihood of me coming off looking bad. Even if what I'm saying is uncontroversial.
I literally, like, wrote up the questions I asked you
and
on a notepad.
And you accused me of dog whistling, too.
It's not dog... So that was in reference to the thing that we both came to an agreement on in the very end, no? Which was the question about, hey, the difference between, okay, we need to be careful in case like there's a threat to our democracy and falls to be able to defend ourselves, and that same prescription, but given a much more radical and much more pressing issue, which would be a genocide. And
But the
we
first
ran
thing
through
that
that,
I
and we
answered,
came to an agreement at the end of this.
The
But
first thing that I answered was,
say,
I don't think you should lie, even if telling the truth can make people potentially act out. And your response to that was like 10 minutes of follow-up questions that felt like reiterations of trying to make me sound like a stochastic terrorist. Like,
okay,
you were
these questions that I asked you,
you were trying to make me sound like a
this
stochastic
not me,
terrorist
like,
for not
in the
wanting
lab,
to lie about
carefully
talking about politics.
stochastically curating the best question to get
You
to
compared what I said to great replacement theory fear-mongering from Tucker Carlson.
So, okay, I'm gonna check this question to see if it makes sense. So, do you agree with me that if if somebody's proclaiming that, hey, there are people in power with the intent to genocide you, that intuitively kind of like leans towards and implies direct offensive violence to deal with that?
No.
Do you agree or do you disagree?
I fully disagree with that.
Okay. I would say that if somebody is literally trying to genocide you, it's like, yeah, there are moral justifications to be given there towards violent.
Oh, do you believe that?
Action against them? Yes, that's what I just said.
Well, it really depends on whether it's effective, doesn't it? Again, if you could just Thanos snap, like, would you Thanos snap X number of people if it would mean a bunch of people survive? Like, okay, sure, but in real life, there are tons of forces conspiring to commit violence against vulnerable people all the time. America has seen this constantly. You know, America genocided the natives for a good long period of time, and depending on your definitions, arguably is still complicit in that genocide today. But, like, acknowledging that fact when talking with like natives wouldn't be like, oh yeah, so you should go kill the president, because that would be psychotic. And would it fix the problem? No, it wouldn't. If anything, the president would just be made a martyr, and they would have doubled down on the killing of native innocents in the following administration. So the idea of like acknowledging that people in power want to commit violence against you, first of all, a ubiquitous concern, necessarily entails an implied act of violence against those people in power. This leaves out so many elements of political consideration. It's just a very like 101 way of thinking about these things. But if you isolate it, it's like, well, if that native person killing the president would have solved the native genocide, then would it be okay for them to kill it? In which case the answer is yes, obviously. But, you know, life isn't like that.
So then to get back, so now do you understand why I drew that parallel there? Because even though we might disagree with the implication towards towards violence, if you like people spread rhetoric about somebody trying to like genocide you, even if we disagree on that, which it seems like we do disagree, do you now like put yourself in my shoes first, put yourself in the shoes of, okay, I'm somebody who believes that if you are engaging in like widespread rhetoric saying that, hey, these people are trying to genocide you, that kind of like intuitively leads towards a call for violence. Okay, let's pretend you believe that for 1 second. Mm-hmm. Now, given that you believe that, and you are having a conversation with yourself, do you understand how you might make like an allegory or like a comparison between your advocacy and the Great Replacement, only insofar as you're trying to demonstrate that point, but you're not actually saying that like, oh, you are basically advocating for the Great Replacement but woke?
No, I think that's psychotic. I think that's like saying like that's like the Nazis and the French Resistance are the same insofar as that they both think violence is an acceptable way of achieving their ends. Like the only reason you would draw that comparison is to smear me, because like there's no other, like you, like the only thing you would have to do is make a comparison between me and any political group to have ever like engaged in any kind of civil unrest, and you would be fine.
No,
but you had to go
genocide,
for them.
Right? That's like the thing that we're talking about.
Genocide
and, like,
happens.
Maybe I'm incorrect. So like, yeah.
Genocide
I think
happens.
Yeah, I understand. But if I'm to think about, okay, right now, contemporary situation, like given the climate that we exist in, the type of like rhetoric that is done, what is that? What is a comparable example for rhetoric relating to genocide and outcomes that could come with it? The Great Replacement comes to mind as like a primary example that would be applicable and fairly analogous.
Black Lives Matter and Richard Spencer, because both groups complain about racism. I mean, clearly, I don't think this is a fair comparison to make.
All right.
Especially since there was
It's
just a
fine.
mass shooting at a black grocery store as a product of great replacement rhetoric. And you're trying to draw a relationship between that and my pointing out the fact that Republicans are signal posting their intention towards violence against queer people. And like, that's the comparison that we're going with.
Okay, do you understand that a comparison isn't necessarily a transferring of all the properties from one thing to another?
Rose,
There's like
Rose, I'm autistic. That's enough people in this convo who are autistic. Let's not both do it, okay? Come on.
Okay, all right. Okay, I mean, if we, hopefully we do, but yeah, I'll use less like inflammatory comparisons in
And if
the
an
future.
example, like if you think with the like genocide means inherently like violence against them, then what about the native example that I provided? Don't you think that would be an example of acknowledging that genocide is being committed against a group, but even if you're aware of that and spreading
so the
that
reason
info,
why
you
I would
shouldn't
probably
then...
default onto the Great Replacement would be for multitude of reasons. Number one, I'm more educated on stuff related to the Great Replacement than the Native American genocide, and thus I can work more dynamically with that in the conversation. And also because one of the key things that have to do with stochastic terrorism is the advent of the internet and like this types of like rhetoric that we have right now, and the way that the discourse has been formed by virtue of us having the internet and the entire stochastic nature of terrorism, which wasn't
at all my position, my original position,
done in the same way back then, which is why I thought that the Great Replacement example was more comparable. But if you think I should have used another example, then that's fine.
Violence is coming for us whether we want it to or not. The only question is how effectively we respond to it. And I feel like it's our responsibility as advocates for the rights of minority groups to be honest and forthcoming about the fact that we literally had a fucking coup attempt in 2021, which was majority supported by a massively powerful political party, which is positioned to win in 2022, at least have gains in the legislature, and possibly win in 2024 with the presidency, in addition to them already having the court. Their presidential lineup backed the coup. They're currently undoing half-century-old constitutional legislation and precedent in ways that align with an anti-minority group agenda. At this point, to look at the situation and say they're not planning something, but what are they planning? What are they, like Keebler elves? Like they're going to do a little wahahe and make life a little worse? Genocides happen. Authoritarian coups happen. We must be realistic about this.
All right. The final thing I wanted to call back is again me trying to like Fed post bait you. Like all the questions that I made, I literally typed up in a notepad like 3 minutes before you picked up my call. Like it's not like these are like carefully curated questions to like what's it called? Trust me, you know I'm a data male. You know I would do preparation. You know if I was like going in here with the intention of clip chimping you, I would not be fucking 3 minutes notepadding this shit, okay? You would probably know that better than most people. So you don't have to engage with that. It's fine. I'm just putting that as another piece of thing up there that like, hey, I wasn't trying to fucking go in and clip chimp you, but
yeah. I don't think you're malicious, Rose Wrist, and I apologize if I've given that impression. It's just look, it's not like this liberal shit hasn't happened before either, you know, where it's like, oh, we're buddy-buddy until somebody gets a little bit antsy with the quietly building an armory. And then all of a sudden, you know, we get real tetchy about being friends. I know the aversion that a lot of liberals have to violence, language which acknowledges the natural state of political violence.
All of your questions.
It's not that
you've said that liberals can't answer. I've answered all of them in this conversation.
Well, okay. I don't want to get to Lupin, you know, whether or not you've answered them.
I don't want to be conflated with other liberals when I ask you why you're doing that, and then you say, well, they can't answer these questions, and I ask you to ask the question, and then I answer them.
Rose, you could be 20 times as smart as me. You're still a liberal. You're not running away from that. We're different. We agree on a lot of these issues, but at the end of the day, you know, there's a reason we were the ones who got killed first when the Nazis took power, and not you. Well, they might have gotten you for something else. Are you queer? Are you anything that they would have gotten?
No. I'm a straight white male.
Okay, well, they definitely fucking would have gotten me first. It's because socialists...
I have curly hair, though, and you know what? If we're talking about the Nazis, okay,
people that's say true. A few
things about my appearance, so,
that's true. Okay, I might have got you for that.
Yeah.
They killed the socialists first because the socialists were the ones most capable of militantly acting against the Nazi regime, you know. Now, of course, the socialists lost, you know, but maybe, if they'd acted earlier and with larger numbers, the Nazi regime would have never been able to cement its power. That's what I want. I want liberals to be as legitimately fearful of the threat of anti-democratic fascism as I am. I want them to be ready for that, you know, because a socialist coalition in the U.S. ain't gonna break back fascist Republican takeover, but a liberal socialist coalition would. That's what I'm primarily concerned about, and it is motivated first and foremost by a defensive advocacy for the rights of all of us. And I just don't think it's controversial, you know. I just think it's straightforward and good, and I think it's morally obligatory.
Yeah, I understand what you've. Yeah, I understand everything that you just said, and I understand why you believe it.
I'm glad you understand what I believe in. Anyway, I need to get back to rambling about the.
Wait, is that a? Do you not think I understand what you believe in?
No, I do think that. I don't think
Okay.
you agree with me, which is why I said that.
Okay.
I need to get back to. Oh, speaking of liberalism, I need
Guns.
to get back to rambling about gun control. That's right.
Based. Yeah, true. Gun control is amazing.
I do
I
appreciate
think
you coming on.
Yeah, you should talk if you haven't already. I know SDL did a lot of gun. He's probably already
he's in
contacted
chat.
about this.
He's looking forward to this.
All right. Well,
Excuse me, sorry.
Good luck on that. Have fun having SDL in chat, picking apart everything that you say.
Oh, I know.
I do not envy your position.
Be well.
All right, you too. Bye.